So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Abu Dhabi. Yes, that is the Yas Marina race circuit over my shoulder. It's been 43 degrees here today, which is hot, but I'm not here for very much longer because in a couple of hours I will be going to the airport to experience the highlight of this entire trip. The highlight might be an exaggeration. I'm going to be taking what is probably the best known tier point run available anywhere in the world, and that is the one offered by SriLankan Airways from here in Abu Dhabi down to Colombo, continuing across to Jakarta in Indonesia. So what makes this trip so special? Well, tier points are the way that British Airways controls your status within its executive club. You only earn them from flying. Flying business earns you way more than in economy, generally 40 every time you fly. But if that flight is over 2,000 miles in length, the tier points you earn jump quite aggressively to 140. Now what makes this particular route with SriLankan quite special is that the flight from here to Colombo is just over 2,000 miles long, and the flight on down to Jakarta is also just over 2,000 miles long. So even though you're only flying a whisker over 8,000 miles in total, you can harvest a whopping 560 tier points from the trip. That's almost enough to get you to silver. Remember, you still need to fly 4 sectors on British Airways to qualify for silver, and it's well over a third of the way to getting gold. Indeed, there are reports of some people doing this trip 2, 3 or even 4 times, one after the other, just to rack up the tier points if they're chasing status. But there are lots of routes that will earn you 560 tier points, but what makes this one quite special is that it's really cheap. I've paid about £800 for this ticket, and it can be regularly bought for that price all year round, and if circumstances are right, you can get it for even cheaper than that if you're lucky. And that means I'm paying about £1.30, £1.40 per tier point for a fairly large block of them. Now, SriLankan doesn't offer the best business class in the world, and it doesn't have the best planes in the world, so there are aspects of this being a little bit of an ordeal. So if you'd like to see what the world's best known tier point run is actually like to experience, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip. When I recorded that intro, I thought I'd cram everything into one video, but it would be a beast if I did so. So I'm going to YouTube like a hobbit and cover this experience in 2 parts, there and back again. Abu Dhabi Airport isn't my favourite. Access to the check-in desks seems to be completely roped off, although plenty of people just unclip the ropes to give themselves access. Respect for barriers has been ingrained into me through my life, so I was compelled to find an authorised way in, which led me all the way to the end of the terminal before doubling back and walking most of the way back again. Odd. I got to the airport a whisker over 3 hours before departure, and the Sri Lankan desks weren't yet manned, but they quickly opened and check-in was very quick and painless. I'd had to get stamped into the country by an agent on arrival, but doing so seemed to have enrolled me in the automated passport system, so I could use a kiosk to leave the country. So I was directed down this side corridor. I'm guessing this was a fast track lane, but it wasn't well signed if it was. Straight after was a security lane, which on this occasion I chose not to film. SriLankan had given me a physical invite to the lounge. It had been ages since an airline had done that. The entry to the lounge was very close to the security point, and what followed was one of the odder lounge experiences I've had in a while. Up the stairs, yes, I take the stairs when I can, and it was rammed. This was the queue for access. As I got to the top, I heard someone calling forward business or first class passengers, but I didn't see who was calling. When I rounded the corner, I suspected it was this chap, and he was plucking actual premium customers from what I assume was just a priority pass queue. He was then able to facilitate some shocking queue jumping, and he directed me towards a door down the end. As the entry queue portended, the lounge was rammed. It was absolutely heaving. Food to the left, and quite a crowd gathered at the bar. But at the end was a door, as had been promised, unguarded but protected by some business class only signage. Pressed the button, the door opened, and I was through into an almost completely deserted inner lounge. It was huge. It went back a fair distance and I was momentarily confused as to where to go, but my inbuilt alcohol detector told me to head left, and sure enough there was a buffet and a bar. With that location marked on my mental map, I kept on hunting for a place to make camp, and specifically for somewhere with a convenient plug socket close to hand. This inner lounge was much bigger than the outer lounge I'd passed through and was almost completely uncontaminated with passengers. There was nothing stopping the masses outside from coming in, nothing except for honesty, which seemed to be in abundant supply amongst that night's passengers. I thought the food options were pretty good. Hot options, some desserts, and quite an interesting salad bar, and if you watch many of my videos you'll know I don't say that often. This first flight was the worst of the four, with an 11 PM departure and 5 AM arrival into Colombo. My plan was to get as much sleep as possible and to decline the service, so I'd already had a substantial dinner before heading to the airport. So I enjoyed a nice cold beer and enough food to top off the tanks, and I watched the tumbleweed blow around the deserted lounge. I got so bored I thought I'd test out my acting skills. Eventually it was time to go, still deserted in that inner sanctum, although it had quietened down a bit in the outer lounge. Abu Dhabi Airport isn't my favourite, as I've said, but it does have some fun design features. Got a low ceiling? Hey, lower it further and make a feature out of it. Got a relatively tight central atrium? Hey, crowd it further by adding a massive central feature. I'm gently mocking, and even though it is all a bit dated, it is quite a fun terminal to experience. The boarding gates are located in spokes radiating off this central space and are a bit cramped, particularly if more than one flight is boarding. But when it was time, SriLankan honoured the principles of priority boarding and I was through to the plane quite quickly. A few minutes of hashtag boarding not boarding, but eventually I made it onto the plane, a 12-year-old Airbus A320 which has been with SriLankan since delivery. 4 rows of 2x2 seating in this business cabin with the usual 3-3 layout in economy behind. Seat 2A for me today, and for a narrow body business seat it's really not bad, particularly if your expectations have been set by European business classes. There's reportedly 41 inches of pitch, which was ample, a few less than I got on Qatar's A320 down from Prague, but still decent. No one next to me either, which is always a bonus. A tray table to the left, which did tray table things, and a retro screen comes out of the armrest to the right. This plane was newer than Qatar's had been, but this screen felt much, much older. It was really quite hot too, for reasons I probably don't want to think too hard about. Overhead air vents, but you can see the general air conditioning system was battling the heat and humidity. I was keen to get as much rest as possible, so went for a water as my pre-departure beverage. I did get a menu, and it felt a little like I was insulting the entire nation of Sri Lanka by declining to eat any of the exciting food. The entire row was empty, as it turned out. We pushed back pretty much bang on time and enjoyed the safety briefing as we taxied to the runway. We were quickly up into the Abu Dhabi late evening. There's something about the lighting of cities in the Middle East that makes them really quite attractive from the air. I was expecting a flight of less than 4 hours, but I only worked out on the plane that Sri Lanka is actually 1.5 hours ahead of Abu Dhabi. Not many countries have a half-hour offset to their time zone, and Sri Lanka shares that honour with Iran, Afghanistan and Burma, so is in auspicious company. It did mean that I had half an hour more time available for sleep than I expected, so as soon as I could, I pulled up the blanket and went to sleep. No breakfast was offered given the brevity of the flight, but I did accept a hot towel and a cup of peppermint tea when I woke. I slept quite well, never great sleep in a recliner, but I actually felt quite refreshed. And 4 hours and 9 minutes after takeoff, we landed into a Colombo pre-dawn morning. And we pulled up to a bus gate, usually a bit of an annoyance, but it was quite nice to get some air to help me wake up. Quite cool air, actually. But SriLankan did the decent thing and provided a bus solely for the business cabin, so we were quickly away towards the terminal. Straight into the terminal, and we really were straight into the terminal. There was no transit security to clear. Up the escalator and you're right in the heart of it. The second lounge pass I'd received on check-in was for the Serendib Business Lounge here in Colombo, so I headed straight there. Cricket's Asian Cup was about to start in Sri Lanka, hence the decorations, but I was warmly welcomed into the somewhat quaint flagship Sri Lankan Airways lounge. They've maximised the seating available in this relatively small space, I think you'll agree. The breakfast spread was actually quite impressive, with Western and local options, as well as sandwiches and salads. I was actually quite impressed. There's also a bar, some good spirits options, and the wine was ready to go, even though it was only 5:20 in the morning. There'd been an amenity kit on the previous flight, but it had been delivered after I'd gone to sleep, so I explored it in the lounge. A little basic, but better than nothing, and thank heavens there was a comb. The Serendib lounge really isn't anything to get excited about, but I enjoyed my hour there and thought it had what you needed. I'll note that there was a shower available, even though I didn't take advantage myself. The onward flight to Jakarta left from a gate in the main terminal, so I headed over and found that there was a security checkpoint at the gate. I didn't film it, but I'm sure that the bottle of Coke Zero I'd liberated from the lounge improved the security agent's lunch plans significantly. This special area had been set aside for business class passengers. I was quite early for the flight and the gate crew actually encouraged me to go back to the lounge, but I was happy to sit and watch the dawn and the rain. Boarding time came, and although it looked at first like there wasn't a plane at the gate, one was actually hiding at the end of the second boarding finger. And onto this 6-year-old Airbus A321neo, again delivered new to SriLankan. This makes it Sri Lankan's third newest plane, and Josh Cahill, who I think currently lives in Sri Lanka, reports that Sri Lankan is the only major airline to have no new planes on order. I found reference to a memorandum of understanding over new wide-body Airbuses, but I couldn't find any evidence of orders. It's been a tough few years for Sri Lanka, and I'm jumping ahead a little, but I thought the Sri Lankan offering was pretty good, and it would be even better if the offering could be delivered on newer planes. Into this 3-row business cabin of 2x2 seating, 2A again, I am turning into a creature of habit. Although, as the only other people in the cabin were in seats 1A and C, the crew suggested I move across the aisle so as to not have people reclining into me, which is an issue in these seats. Seat Guru reports 49 inches of pitch, but Seat Guru can be wrong, and it really didn't feel that big. A tray table pops out of the armrest. I'm running out of interesting things to say in these videos about tray tables, to be honest. Overhead air vents and a light. There were seatback TVs in this newer plane, decent quality too. The other armrest housed a remote, a sort of mouse arrangement for controlling your selections. It took a bit of getting used to, but there was a small range of films on offer, 104 in total. All of them seemed to be available in English though, so although the range of Hollywood movies was relatively narrow, I'm sure most people would find something to watch. A pre-departure drink, champagne, was offered, but it was still early and I was content with an orange juice along with a cold towel. We ended up pushing a little bit behind schedule, no real explanation of why, but we were soon up into the sky. I have spent a little time in Sri Lanka, but that was 25 years ago, and it is an attractive country that I do need to get back to. A breakfast menu, as you'd expect on a flight departing before 8 AM, and as a cheese omelette isn't something that sets my pulse racing, I went for the milk rice trio, and I'm pleased I did, as it was absolutely delicious. Unfamiliar to the Western palate, particularly this early, but not overly spicy, and I really enjoyed it. Served quickly too, and I was able to enjoy the meal as we crossed the eastern coast of Sri Lanka as we headed out into the Indian Ocean. The loo was an Airbus A321 loo, reserved for business class, and there was some elaboration for the premium passengers aboard. Hard to say much more about an airplane loo. After breakfast I thought I might as well attempt another nap. There was a modest amount of recline, better than nothing, but it's never going to be great with this type of seat. There also was a fold-out footrest, which I just found to be annoying. It was very thin, but what it was made from made it also really slippy. I did manage to get a few hours sleep, but I think I preferred Sri Lanka's A320 seats for sleeping rather than the A321. A cup of regular tea this time before landing, and we were down into Jakarta after 4 hours and 35 minutes in the air. We seemed to do some big swerves to avoid weather, and it looked like that we may have crossed the equator at least twice on the way down. Quite a pleasant day in Jakarta though. Now, Indonesia doesn't make it easy to visit its lovely shores. First of all, Jakarta Airport is huge, and Sri Lankan seems to get the very furthest gate. It's one place I would recommend getting disability assistance if you're not good on your pins. They have glammed up the fire extinguishers though, which makes the walk a little more entertaining. Most nationalities need a visa. I entered on my Australian passport and it cost me ₹500,000, which is about $35 US. You can buy this visa on arrival, although I believe you need cash and there can be a queue. I always get these sorts of visas before arriving if it's at all possible, as it's one less thing to worry about after a flight, and although the Indonesian government website was a bit fiddly, it was easy enough to get the visa sorted in advance. Then there's also an electronic customs process. A simple online form and a QR code is produced, again something best done before arriving. Both the immigration officers and the customs people asked me quite a few questions, nothing out of the ordinary, although the immigration chap seemed surprised that a man of my age didn't have any children. But it was all painless enough and I was soon through. It would be extremely challenging to attempt a back-to-back in Jakarta and to go back to Colombo on the same plane you arrived on. I'm not going to definitively say it's impossible, but I wouldn't attempt it. There certainly isn't enough time to immigrate and get back around to the check-in desks within the plane's turnaround times. Although an international airside connection is theoretically possible, there's a lot of distance to cover and the bureaucracy of doing so might be painful. I've never seen a report of someone doing a back-to-back there, and if you're going to go all that way, I'd take the opportunity to see a bit of Indonesia. I stayed for 5 nights and will make a separate video about what I found in Jakarta and in Bali. So I'm going to leave this video here. Next week will be part 2, the back again part, and at the end of that I'll sum up the experience and share some tips on how to get the most out of this trip if you've decided that this is a great way to gather tier points yourselves. So thanks for watching, give the video a like, subscribe and leave me a comment, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.